Hey, how's it going? In this video, I want to give you kind of the basics of one of my favorite openings to play, which is the Vienna Gambit. And this opening is pretty fun. I find that it tends to be an opening that people aren't really expecting. And it's like an e4, e5 opening, but it diverges in a way that is not quite as common. And people tend not to be like super prepared for it, in my experience. And it leads often to some nice kind of open attacking games, which for me personally, I tend to like. And, the flavor of opening that you like might differ from mine, but hopefully this will just kind of pique your interest and maybe encourage you to give it a try. So the Vienna game happens after e4, e5, and then, sorry, just gonna mute my computer here. There we go. E4, e5, and then we play knight c3. So the most common move in this position is knight f3, which puts immediate pressure on that pawn and also develops a piece, to which black will typically respond knight c6, which defends this pawn and also develops a piece. And so this is the kind of game that people are generally expecting, and then we go into the Italian game or the Spanish or the Ruy Lopez, things like this. But instead of going into all that, this is the Vienna opening. And there are a bunch of different ways that the game can go from here. The most common response is knight f6, where black will put some pressure on white's e-pawn. It's almost like sort of the main line in reverse, like white's pawn is the one that is under pressure instead of black's, which is interesting. This is called the Falkbeer variation. There's also the Max Lang defense, which is very playable, as well as the Anderson defense, which is also quite good. But we're going to talk about the Falkbeer variation, which goes into the mainline Vienna Gambit after white plays f4. And this is where things get pretty interesting and fun. So we're going to go through a couple different lines and different ways to play this. So first of all, the first thing to remember here is that black should never accept this gambit. Accepting the gambit is very unsound. So if black takes this pawn, what white should do is immediately push forward with e5. Now the knight is under attack, and the question is, where can the knight go? How can the knight get away from this attack? The knight can't go to either of these squares because white's knight is controlling them. The knight can't go to either of these squares because white's queen is controlling them. And so really the only move that the knight has is to go all the way back to g8, which is just a little bit depressing. And then, white is going to develop knight f3, and now white has developed two pieces, black has developed none. White is going to push the d-pawn and then bring the bishop out, win back the pawn quite quickly, and have everything out of the opening that they could possibly want. Another try here that I've seen quite a bit, and it's not unsound, it's perfectly fine, is for black to bring the queen and actually pin this pawn to the king so that white can't take that knight immediately. But white can then just move their own queen to e2, and now black just has the exact same problems. Again, there's nothing better for black to do here than to just move the knight back. And there are actually some interesting lines where this queen can be under attack now with some different types of lines. So black can't accept the gambit. What about declining the gambit with the knight? This seems like a sensible move at first glance because black develops a piece, and if white captures on e5, then black is ready to recapture with a knight. But this actually also doesn't work for black. So after white captures and then black recaptures, not only has white traded a flank pawn for a central pawn, which it probably gives white a bit of an edge, but now white can play aggressively by just pushing d4 right away. So now this knight has to move somewhere. Usually it'll move back here or over to g6. And then once again, white has the opportunity to play e5. And again, this knight just has to move back to its home square. And after white develops f3, now white is, very close to castling, could even develop on this side and castle long if they wanted to. And white is just feeling really good, has a really good game here. So let's reset. Black should not accept the gambit and should not decline the gambit with the knight going to c6. So how about declining the gambit with d6? This is perfectly fine. With correct play here, white should always have a little bit of an edge because d6 is just a little bit too passive for what white is trying to do. But it's totally playable, and usually white will develop knight f3. And I'll just show you some of the main ideas. If black develops the knight to c6, it's pretty common to pin this knight, and then we're going to put a pawn on d3. And now with lots of pawns on light squares, if this bishop is ever attacked, we'll probably just trade it off for this knight. White will castle short, probably trade off this pawn. In some lines you want to push it, but often you want to trade it. And then white will have a semi-open f-file, which is a pretty common idea for many different lines of the Vienna. After pushing this pawn, often the f-file gets cleared out and white castles short and gets this semi-open f-file. And we'll see that a little bit more in a later line as well. So this line could look something like this. Black plays bishop to d7, white plays d3, black plays bishop to e7, and now both sides are ready to castle, and sort of the game continues from here. There are much deeper lines, of course, but I already told you kind of the main ideas that we might see in this position. One interesting idea, though, as you may notice in this position, is this pawn is being attacked twice, and it's being defended twice, but one of its defenders can actually be traded off. And so in this position, white can actually win a pawn right away. And there's a little bit of a caveat here because this works in this position, but it doesn't work in every position, and I'm going to show you why. So I'm going to show you an example game. This is a game that I played in a recent tournament. It was a rapid game. It wasn't part of a classical tournament. It was rapid. It was 20 minutes with 5-second increment, so decent amount of time. And so I played e4, I got into the Vienna, and then after knight f6, I was able to play f4, the Vienna Gambit. And so my opponent played d6, so declined the gambit somewhat passively. And then after knight f3, they also played this move, which also seemed a little bit incorrect and passive. Now, one thing is it kind of takes a bit of the sting out of my bishop coming to f5, or b5, sorry. So I didn't do that. Another common idea is to develop the bishop here before pushing d3. So this was perfectly fine. They played e7, I played d3. Black castles, white castles, and now after knight b6, I see, of course, that black is attacking this bishop, but I'm looking and seeing, okay, well, now that knight isn't defending the pawn, can't I just win this pawn? So pause the video here and see if you can figure out why taking that pawn is a big mistake. It's not necessarily immediately a big mistake, but basically, why can white not actually win a pawn here? So once you've taken a second to do that, I'll show you, because I actually went ahead and did that in the game. I thought that I could win a pawn, and so here's how it went. I captured, black captured, I captured with the knight, and then boom, queen d4 check. So that's one of the things to always remember with the Vienna. Since this f-pawn is pushed, the Vienna Gambit specifically, there's some other lines in the Vienna where this f-pawn doesn't get pushed, but certainly in the Vienna Gambit, because the f-pawn gets pushed, this dark square diagonal can be weak, can be very weak for the king. And so now, of course, once the king moves out of check, white just simply is, or black rather, is simply just up a piece. And so the rest of the game is not very exciting. I tried to defend and cause some complications, but ultimately I lost, being down a piece out of the opening. So again, the declining the gambit, if we just go back, declining the gambit with d6 is perfectly playable. It's maybe a little bit passive, but you know, it's a game, and with correct play, white should have a bit of an edge. but certainly it's not an unsound move. But let's reset again and talk about the main line. So the main line and the best move for black is actually the aggressive looking d5 push. So black wants to just immediately fight for control of the center of the board. And there's quite a bit of theory here, maybe not as much as with some other openings, but there are lots of lines to consider. But the main line looks something like white will capture with the f-pawn, black will capture here with the knight, and then there's a few different ways that this can go. I like to play queen f3, and then after knight takes, a lot of lines in the Vienna, you end up taking with this b-pawn, which opens up sort of the semi-open b file. The rook will often slide over there and just cause some pressure here, especially after the light-squared bishop has moved away. And then if black just does a simple developing move like knight c6, now white will push immediately into the center with d4. And this is the kind of position that white really likes. There's a really nice pawn chain in the center. This bishop is going to come out. Both bishops are going to be pointing at the king side. We're going to bring the knight. We're going to castle. We're going to have this semi-open f file, and we're going to be able to launch an attack pretty quickly. And so a line could look like bishop e7, bishop out to d3, castles, knight e2, and then, like I said, we're going to castle and we're going to attack. So moving back just a little bit here, another way for black to play in this position is to try to prevent white from getting this ideal center. And one way to do that is actually to push c5. And something that white can do in this case is, rather than pushing immediately, because if they push immediately, it might be okay, but black can take and then immediately start to put pressure on this backwards pawn. So it's not quite as nice for white. So something else white can do here is actually slide the queen over to g3, and now, sort of as compensation for white not being able to get this nice big ideal center that they want, white has now made it difficult for black to actually develop this bishop. And so again, the game continues from here. So there's more lines and theories and so on that we could get into, but this is just kind of an interesting position. White will try to get everything developed and castle and use this semi-open f file and try to attack, and black will maybe try to use the fact that they have a better center, get developed, and continue from there. Let me just show you one more example game of the Vienna Gambit main line. This one was actually quite a short game, but shows what can happen if black doesn't understand what white is trying to do with the game. So Vienna Gambit, main line with d5, capture the e-pawn, bring the queen out, capture here, like I said, the getting this semi-open b file. And now, in this game, this was a rapid game that I played online. Black just kind of played here, which seemed quite passive and like it just gives me a free move. Maybe they're thinking they want to expand on this side of the board, which, I don't know, maybe that could work. But now I get this nice, beautiful pawn chain in the center. They try to undermine it, but it's almost a little bit late at this point because now I'm just getting developed. So bishop d3, knight c6. It's also worth noting that if this pawn comes down here, then this bishop can just kind of move here and it's fine. Like, even if the trade happens, white is still quite active. Knight c6, knight e2, maybe rerouting the knight here or here. g6 and castles. So it seems like white is going to try to fianchetto this bishop. I guess they liked that better than this move, but after castling, black evidently didn't see that I had this powerful attack already along the f-file. And so after playing c4, trying to attack this bishop, they're one move too late because queen takes f7 is just simply checkmate. So that's the kind of thing you can get with the Vienna is these nice sort of sharp open lines, quick attacks against the king side. And if you like sort of open games and attacking chess, then it might be a fun opening for you. So those are the basics. There's a lot more study that can go into it, of course, but yeah, I find that it generally gives me positions that I tend to enjoy. I would consider myself to be an attacking chess player, and so I like having these open lines and these quick attacks that I can open up out of the opening. So, as I said, may or may not be the flavor for you, but I'd encourage you to give it a try. Hopefully this piqued your interest a little bit, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one.